The story of Jesus walking on water. That is a famous one. So it happens right after the feeding of the 5,000, which was the part of the gospel that Pastor Laurel preached on last week. And so this is right after that scene, okay? And Jesus is wiped out. He is tired. So he wants to go up into the mountains and pray and get some rest and take a break. And meanwhile, he sends the disciples across the lake in the boat. And then, on their voyage, a storm kicks up, and waves begin to batter their boat, and the disciples become terrified. And I think we can empathize with the disciples here. Many of us know the feeling of being outside when a summer storm blows in. And some of us even know the distinct fear that comes with getting caught on the water when a storm rolls in. And in either case, we all know that feeling. It drums up a particularly primal, animalistic anxiety, doesn't it? The pressure changes, the air cools, our instincts heighten. And when that first wave of wind comes from that storm, we feel pretty powerless and small in a hurry, don't we? So on one hand, we can understand the basic fear of getting caught in a storm that these disciples were experiencing. And on the other hand, there is something particularly scary about water for first century Israelites. First of all, according to scholars, most people in that first century, in that ancient world, didn't know how to swim. And not only that, culturally speaking, water for first century Israelites held symbolically dark and scary undertones. For ancient Israel, water, particularly violent water, symbolized destructive powers on a cosmic, political, or even personal level. And we see that symbolism throughout the Old Testament. From the Psalms to the prophets, rough water is often used in Old Testament scriptures to symbolize something threatening or uncontrollable. In Isaiah, the 17th chapter, it is raging water that is used to describe the terror and immediate threat of Israel's enemies. In Psalm 89, it is violent water that represents the opposite of God's peaceful rule. And in our psalm today, Psalm 93, it was rising water, flood water, that represents that which competes against God. In other words, there was a religious and cultural phobia assigned to water rooted in Israelite history. Water, for these disciples, in other words, would have been a cultural and spiritual boogeyman. So this is all to say, as we immerse ourselves in the gospel today, we need to understand that this moment for those disciples was a moment of all-encompassing fear. It wasn't just a storm on the water that they were facing, but also an age-old cultural and spiritual nemesis, violent water. And then, to make matters even more terrifying, as they're facing the existential threat and the spiritual cultural threat of these raging waters, now all of a sudden a figure starts to walk towards them. And as they made out that figure, they thought it was a ghost. So we've got a raging storm, cultural phobias of water, they're feeling helpless, and then a ghost. But of course, it was not a ghost. Rather, the figure walking on water was Jesus. This was a moment of deep fear and anxiety down to the bones, and into that moment, Jesus makes and made himself present and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And so then Peter tried to go to Jesus on the water, but still overcome by fear, he began to sink. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand, lifted Peter up, and saved him, and the winds ceased. With this story and all that context about fear and water and Israel's history, a lot in this famous story is being revealed about who Jesus is and who Jesus is for us. In other words, Jesus walking on water isn't some impressive magic trick that's supposed to get us to go, ooh and ah, this guy's really something, isn't he? Remember, water in this story is both literally and symbolically meaningful. So Jesus' ability to have power over it is profoundly revealing about who Jesus is. Over an element that Israel for centuries has regarded as literally and figuratively representative of that which opposes life, Jesus is the one, finally, who shows that he has mastery over it, over even those mighty waters and destructive waves. In fact, he walks all over it. Therefore, again, this moment helps reveal Jesus' identity. He's the one who has power over even water, over that age-old existential and spiritual adversary. So it is no wonder that this is actually the first time in the entire Gospel of Matthew. We're 14 chapters in, halfway through the whole Gospel, and it's the first time in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus is recognized out loud as the Son of God. In fact, it's how our passage ends. Those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, this is the Son of God." In other words, again, this isn't some impressive divine magic trick. This is a proclamation of who Jesus is. Jesus is revealing himself in relation to all of Israel's history. This isn't just another prophet. This isn't just another rabbi. Jesus is showing powers of the creator of the universe. This is the Son of God. And his walking on water not only reveals who Jesus is, it reveals who he is for us. Walking on water was impressive, but it was also compassionate. Jesus offers his presence to people in fear. And this is indeed good news, because we all know how destructive fear can be. One theologian expands, quote, whether it's fear of a returning illness, fear of the stability of a fragile relationship in our lives, fear of loneliness after loss, fear of not being accepted by those we esteem, fear of whether we'll fare well in this new chapter in our lives. You name it, there is a lot in our lives that can make us afraid. And that fear is debilitating. It paralyzes us. Or like for Peter, fear threatens to drown us. Fear keeps us from moving the way we're meant to move. And when we are debilitated by fear, what does this Son of God offer us? He offers us his presence. And like for those terrified and helpless disciples on the boat, in our fear, Jesus comes to us, not to impress us with a magic trick, but to sit with us, to strengthen us, to be compassionate to us who are scared. And with such presence and love, he lifts us up. So with that promise, I want you to think about what fears are causing you to sink. What fears in your lives are paralyzing you? What fears in your lives are battering your boat? Is it uncertainty of your finances? Is it the fate of this school year? Is it national politics? Is it COVID? Is it any other illness that threatens you and your body? Perhaps the fear that paralyzes you is your marriage and the challenges of communication and commitment between you and your spouse. Perhaps your fear is parenting and how challenging it can be to be a mom or a dad. Perhaps your fear is any family dysfunction that threatens the stability of a whole system around you. Perhaps it's fear of failure. Or maybe it is fear of death or insecurity about who you are. We all have much about which to be afraid. And our fears indeed batter us like raging water. And in those storms of fear and anxiety, who is Jesus for us? Jesus is with us. So as the boats of your lives, of our lives, get battered by wave after wave, as we sink in the waters of all that scare us, all that scares us, there Jesus is, reaching again and again into your life, pulling your head above the water with the proclamation that you are not alone, that no storm has the ultimate power over His love, over His grace, and over His presence. With Jesus' presence, my friends, we are accepted. We are enough. We are defined only by His love, only by His power, only by His death and His resurrection. And if that is not a hand in the storm, I don't know what is. So yes, take heart. Do not be afraid, because we face the storms around us with none other than the stiller of storms. Sisters and brothers, I know that the struggle with our many fears and our broken lives is great. But this famous story compels us to remember every day to take heart, to have some audacity, and to have some courage. So my hope for all of you as you go back out and confront those scary waters in your lives, your cancer, your familial conflict, your dwindling bank account, your stress, your loneliness, your anxiety, COVID, whatever it may be, my hope is that you remember that the Son of God, the one who has faced and conquered storms, is with you and for you, bent and committed for all of eternity on lifting you up and lifting you back into the person you are meant and called to be. Amen.